Hi, my name is Jordan Smith. The title of my presentation is called Why We Cut. This is a topic on the forest surrounding Cowan's Gap State Park, which is the Buchanan State Forest here in Pennsylvania. The theme of my presentation is just to help people understand why cutting trees is truly important to environmental success and how it benefits the future of our forest, especially here in Pennsylvania. So, Cowan's Gap is a state park here in Pennsylvania that is practicing preservation. The land here is preserved. You cannot cut on state park lands here in Pennsylvania, but the Buchanan State Forest, which you can see in this picture, these are all the mountains of the Buchanan State Forest. You can cut there because they practice conservation, not preservation. Conservation is just pretty simple when you conserve the lands for future use. That way we have forests forever. So we just want to create healthy forests. By creating a healthy forest, we have to do this through a forest management practice called thinning. Thinning is basically when you go into a forest and you pick out trees that you want to cut, and you go in and cut them. This leaves holes in the canopy, which I'll explain later how that benefits, but I like to really stress how, in this picture particularly, you can see how there's younger age trees and then there's older age trees. There's trees of all heights. That's really what a healthy forest looks like, and that's our goal here in Pennsylvania. So I like to use the analogy of comparing thinning a forest to how you weed your garden. For those of you who have had a vegetable garden, you know you have to weed it if you want your plants to grow. On a larger scale, you have to go into a bigger forest, pick out small trees that you want, cut them, and weed them out, just like you would on a smaller scale in a veggie garden. So yes, for this we do have to use chainsaws when weeding a forest. Chainsaws have gotten a bad rep from timber companies who practice improper forest management and clear cut everything. But when you're doing it properly, chainsaws can be very useful. So if you look here at this diagram, you can see how we thin. First, you walk through the forest stand and you're going to pick trees that you want to cut, and you're going to mark them with tree paint. Trees that you are going to keep, they're going to have good form, nice crowns, good genetics overall. They'll be tall, they won't have any defects. Trees that you are going to mark to cut, they're going to be dead or dying, they're going to have improper form and small crowns. You can see in this diagram what it looks like when you go from one forest that's full, you go in, you pick trees to thin, and there's little holes in the canopy that are going to allow light to shine down through and hit the forest floor. The light, when it comes down through, that's going to promote regeneration of the forest floor. So you're going to have smaller trees that are going to start coming up because they finally have light, whereas before they didn't have any light reaching the floor because the canopies of the other trees were so big. So next, I just really want to talk about the main points on why we thin and to make sure everybody understands what happens after the thinning occurs in the years to come. So, like I said before, light reaches the canopy through those holes, which promotes regeneration. After you have those holes in the canopy, that provides spacing, which the trees that were already there, they can grow. The trees that you left that you did not cut, they can grow wider and they will get taller too, because there's holes in the canopy that let trees in the mid-story of the forest grow up into the top canopy. So they will grow wider, they will grow taller. All of the dead and dying trees are gone now, so you don't have to worry about that. More diversity, which I don't know if anyone has heard this before, but in forestry I was always told a diverse forest is resilient because you have more ages and you have different species. Being more resilient applies to insect invasions. When you have, before when you had an all maple forest, then you went in and you thinned, and now you have some oaks coming up. The same insects that before would kill all of the maples are now not going to kill the whole forest because there's oaks in there. So they might go through and they might spot pick some of the maples, but they're not going to kill the whole forest because now you have more diversity and those insects don't attack those trees. This also can apply to wind and fire when you have a more diverse forest. Speaking of wind and fire, it's important to remember that forest management practices mimic large-scale disasters anyway. Thinning mimics something coming into a forest area, most likely an insect, and killing trees here and there, spot picking the trees. The only difference that you have between the large-scale disaster and the forest management practice is that in the management practice, us humans have control of what's happening. You can pick out in these pictures the more healthy, diverse forest because of these forest management practices. They have a better chance at surviving the windstorms, the fires, the insect and invasive species infestations. You can see in these pictures where forests that are unhealthy are all the same age and size. The trees there, because they're the same size and the same age as they're dying. For example, if you look at pictures where you can tell that a windstorm came through, the windstorm will knock out a whole 20-year-old pine stand because they're all the same height. They have nothing underneath those top branches. They have nothing underneath in the mid-story or understory to help balance out the speeds of that wind. So as soon as the windstorm comes through, it's just going to blow all of those trees over. Whereas if you had a healthier forest where there was trees underneath all of those trees in the overstory, they would have had some more help and some more kind of muscle to take on the windstorm instead of just being completely knocked over. Also, as I said before, another disaster that is mimicked by thinning would be an insect infestation, where an insect comes into a forest area and picks different trees that they want to kill. This is dangerous. This is unhealthy to a forest because if they're all the same species, the insect is just going to jump from tree to tree and start killing all of the trees in that one area, especially if the spacing of the trees is not proper and they'll have closer range from where they can attack. So if you had a healthier forest, a more diverse forest that was promoted because of thinning operations, it is less likely for something like that to happen because you have a forest that is spread apart. The insects would have more trouble to get faster from tree to tree. And also you have different species. It is very, very unlikely that that particular insect is attracted to those exact species that are in there. There's probably one tree in that whole stand that that insect wants to hit, and they'll kill those ones, but they're not going to be able to hit every single tree in there. So that's just another reason why thinning is popular. Next, I want to talk about the invasive species issue. With clear cutting, sometimes when, clear cutting has a really bad rap because a lot of times it is done wrong. It's not done proper. When you clear cut a whole area, that lets in a lot of light, and sometimes invasive species such as mile-a-minute, barberry, Japanese angelica tree of heaven. These invasive species that take over an area completely will come in and take over that clear cut. But just to justify proper clear cutting in forest management practices, it is good for wildlife such as grouse and woodcock habitat. smaller animals, they do well in big open areas like this. Woodcock and grouse were actually endangered in Pennsylvania at one time, so it was helpful that we had clear cutting. Next, I want to touch on forest fires and how, as forest managers, you can use cutting or prescribed burning to cut back on large-scale forest fires in general. When you do a prescribed fire, you are releasing that carbon, and then you do it again, you burn again in another 15-20 years, so you're releasing carbon again, and that is less likely to cause a large-scale fire where there's no control. Some trees actually grow back a lot better after fire too, like oaks. This picture here, you can see the different trees that are spot picked that are brown. That's from an insect infestation that I was talking about earlier, most likely a beetle. So just as a recap here, these are all of the forest districts in Pennsylvania that practice forest management and conservation and promote thinning. Thinning promotes regen. It cuts back on disasters such as wind and fire. It promotes diversity, which creates resilience. The forest will get on a cycle so you have multiple age trees, which gives you a healthy forest forever. This is DCNR's logo, which practices forest stewardship, which leads to healthy forests forever. Thinning and cutting trees leads to healthy forests forever, for people to enjoy for forever, and for us to have fresh air for forever. After watching my presentation, I hope that you understand why we have to cut trees and how it benefits us. Thank you for watching.